It sounds odd on the surface, but evolution doesn't always have to be linear. Things can feel more like a step back than a step forward, or sometimes they can feel like a complete departure from the original form. It can seem less like logical progression and more like the turning of a kaleidoscope. The picture is completely different, but if you squint, the colors are still the same. The etymology of foment is kind of like that. What began as a term used in medicine as a way to soothe and heal infirmities became altered to more closely associate it with concepts of rebellion and revolution. Quite contrary to foment's original intent, there is now an air of menace in its use, though technically there is nothing truly nefarious about its definition. The word is simply described in the sense of promoting the growth or development of something. Yet, where the word promotion has all of these positive connotations, like advancement and prosperity, foment seems more relegated to the darker side of these progressions, almost like it is used to describe the growing pains of movements, political or otherwise, the meat thrown in the grinder that no one wants to think about. But the disparity between foment's original intent and what it has come to be associated with really just leaves its objective definition to be quite vague. To promote the growth or development of something, to rouse something, to incite something. These are broad definitions which could allude to almost anything, making it a bit complicated to speak about what might have fomented anything, really. And as an example of what exactly I mean by this, we are going to discuss why the French Revolution was inevitable. And to do this, we actually need to travel back in time an entire millennium, because the seeds of this reckoning were sown into the creation of the very framework of the French nation-state. The Carolingian dynasty, the founding house of the Holy Roman Empire, which we spoke about in depth in our episode covering the lexicology of the word Carolingian, was broken apart over decades due to partible inheritance and near-constant rebellions, among other issues. This left much of the continent divided into provinces, fiefdoms, and independent communities of people, without much in the way of larger centralized governments holding things together. This is until the members of the Capetian dynasty were able to unify some of these communities and lay the groundwork for what we would today recognize as France. In order to consolidate this power, Capetian monarchs made agreements with rulers of these various provinces, offering them certain privileges, which were justified as a response to the nobles and clergy of the regions looking after their citizens, providing protection, education, hospitals, etc. But in actuality, these considerations were mainly given in exchange for their support of the king's absolute rule. The terms of these privileges served to entwine the king's power with that of the nobles in such a way that they could not be separated without complete upheaval of the entire government. Meanwhile, France, along with other European powers, began the colonization of the Americas following their discovery at the tail end of the 15th century, which is just to say that France, in addition to carrying out its normal functions, was also funding exploration, expansion, and colonization of a faraway land, and now fighting wars on two different continents, putting a strain on the monarchy's power, as well as the country's finances. As such, when the king attempted to consolidate power further and remove some of the nobles' privileges, especially those of tax exemptions, in the wake of the 30 Years' War, the nobles revolted, causing a series of civil wars which led to devastation and economic hardships within the provinces, ending in the crown's victory and the exposition of the aristocracy's self-serving motives, which is not to say that the crown did not also have self-serving motives. After these wars, with little trust left in the nobles, Louis XIV made attendance at his palace at Versailles essentially mandatory, at least to anyone who wanted his favor. Having the nobles at his court allowed Louis to have eyes on them, but it also resulted in the neglect of their duties to their citizens, as well as funneling wealth away from the provinces into maintaining their positions at court, which further eroded public opinion and resulted in the majority of French citizens viewing the aristocracy as parasites rather than leaders. Then, during the American Revolution, Louis XVI made the choice to send aid to the colonists in their war for independence from Britain, which was a very interesting decision for someone who was trying to maintain an absolute monarchy. It called into question the divine right to rule, taxation of the lower classes to fund a government in which they were not adequately represented, and issues of equality, to name a few. And the Age of Enlightenment brought some of these issues further into the spotlight, with writers and philosophers openly questioning the current systems of government, church, and caste. These new ideas flourished within the sphere of French culture specifically. With its deep respect for art and philosophy, there were discussions on the topic being carried out in newspapers, at coffee shops, in lectures, books, salons, and other venues. They became very well known. So the colonists' victory, which was meant to serve as a proxy victory for France over England and increase the monarchy's popularity, was actually another nail in the coffin for the Ancien Régime, because it showed that these ideals of freedom and equality were possible. And it is here that these events, which I have admittedly described with great brevity, each having been a catalyst to another, come together to foment one of the most significant inflection points in Europe's history, the French Revolution. And that is to say nothing of what the revolution itself fomented throughout the rest of Europe. Governmental reforms, the creation of states, the dissolving of states, 2 world wars, genocide, and democracy for much of the continent, to name a few. The Europe of today would never have existed if it weren't for the French Revolution, and the French Revolution would never have happened without centuries of repression. To quote Malcolm Gladwell, "The culture we belong to and the legacies passed down by our forebears shape the patterns of our achievement in ways we cannot begin to imagine. It's not enough to ask what successful people are like, in other words. It is only by asking where they are from that we can unravel the logic behind who succeeds and who doesn't. The unjust taxes, the lack of representation for and the disenfranchisement of 80% of France's population, wars, famines, science, and philosophy all came together to incite, to rouse, to foment. And interestingly, it is during the 17th century, while these tensions are beginning to rise, that we see the definition of foment shift from its original meaning and begin to embody our modern definition. You see, initially, foment came to life seemingly about midway through the Ancien Régime, though we can trace the origins back much further. Let's take a look. Foment makes its first appearance, at least in English, in the early 15th century, when it was used in the sense of applying hot liquids or poultices, more specifically to the body, in order to soothe some kind of ailment or malady. And it comes to us by way of the Old French fomenter, which similarly meant to apply a hot compress, usually to a wound. We derive this from the late Latin fomentare, which came from earlier Latin fomentum, meaning a warm application or poultice. Fomentum itself was actually a contraction of the word foementum, coming from foere, to warm, heat, or encourage. And interestingly, this is related to the Latin word for fever, febris, and we actually spoke about the history of this word and its connections to the Roman pantheon more in depth in our episode covering the name February. Foere is thought to come from the Proto-Indo-European root dech, meaning burn. We can begin to see the broadening of foment's definition around the 1620s, where it was expanded to indicate that something was inciting or instigating some kind of reaction, as if by heating things up. This semantic shift was likely influenced by the usage of the word in French, but the earliest use of foment in English that we are currently aware of is believed to be from around 1425 and comes from a translation of a 1363 Latin medical text, the Chirurgia, which we will speak about in more depth in just a moment. We can find our first mention of foment in a line referencing the proper method for the removal of a ventos, which is a now obsolete term for a cupping glass used to draw blood or other matter out of the body. Quote, "The manner of removing a ventos is that the place be fomented with hot water." Here we can see quite exactly how foment was originally used. It was intended to soothe and heal, to protect from infection. And this was something of great import to the author of Chirurgia, the acclaimed French surgeon, Guy de Chauliac. Chauliac was the most highly distinguished surgeon in Europe during the Middle Ages. He studied in France as well as Italy and saw Europe through multiple plague outbreaks, although most of his career was spent in Avignon, where he served as physician to a succession of popes. Though that alone is a significant achievement, it was his exhaustive opus on the topic of surgery which would be his greatest contribution not only to the field of medicine, but to the world, and it would earn him the moniker, the father of surgery. In the book, he discussed topics like anatomy, the history of medicine, the art and science of surgery, personal observations, appropriate bedside manner, which was of utmost importance to him, but also protocol for things like abscesses, diseases that require surgery, ulcers, fractures, and wounds, as well as information on different surgical tools, in addition to suggested antidotes and fomentations and more. And he even included in the text recipes for concocting poultices with which to foment wounds, ulcers, and abscesses. For example, the pain, which is the proper symptom of these abscesses, is appeased according to the matter from which it is made. Someone uses for this pain rose oil or violet oil or egg white with camphor, and women's milk with nightshade water and rose oil or almond oil in which earthworms have been boiled, or those that are found under jugs or stones, which have several feet and are round like half a bean, and pumpkin seed oil and water lily, papaverin, and salt oil, instilled warm and applied to the outside with wool. And this is just one recipe. There were a number of others included throughout the text. Chauliac's Chirurgia was so comprehensive that it stood as the standard surgical reference in Europe for centuries after it was written, at least until the 1600s. Though I should note, his treatments of wounds, these fomentations, became considered antiquarian, and it is thought that their inclusion may have actually hampered advancement in that regard. But it is precisely these archaic applications that give us insight into the true ancestry of foment. Thank you so much for listening all the way through if you did. Please leave a like if you learned something. Also feel free to leave a comment if there are any other words you would like to hear covered in the future.